The server rooms buzzed in silence, unaware they were about to become the epicenter of a scandal. At 3:02 a.m., an anonymous whistleblower leaked over 200 GB of confidential data. Emails, internal memos, classified Palantir contracts. Onto the darknet. Chaos ignited. In Washington, red alert meetings flared. In Silicon Valley, CEOs received hushed calls, warning of surveillance systems far more invasive than anyone had admitted. Newsrooms scrambled as the leak revealed covert funding of extremist networks and clandestine government deals. Peter Thiel, stoic in a darkened room, refreshed his encrypted dashboard with a tremor. Only he felt. A slow grin, unreadable in meaning, cracked his face. The world was imploding around him, but was this the chaos he planned? The media didn't know who to crucify first. Protesters gathered before dawn. The shadow empire had bled into the daylight, and the world could no longer pretend it didn't exist. By mid-morning, the internet was ablaze. #Shadow Empire trended across every platform. News anchors stumbled over legal jargon they barely understood. Viewers were glued to glowing rectangles as tech analysts tried to explain what Palantir really was, and what it had really done. A few murmured the word traitor. Others called Thiel a visionary. But in private chat rooms, the language was darker. Whispers of a rogue AI project. Surveillance that had predicted civil unrest before it happened. Some called it pre-crime, others called it tyranny. Meanwhile, Thiel remained silent. No statement. No denial. The press couldn't find him. But those who knew him weren't surprised. He always struck before the world had time to notice. And when chaos followed, he watched it, like a chess master letting the board burn, calculating what emerged from the ashes. The leak wasn't just data. It was names. Codename lists with real identities. Whistleblowers. Activists. Foreign operatives. Some had been targeted. Others disappeared. A journalist read the documents live, visibly shaken. We're not just talking surveillance. This is digital warfare. Journalists tried tracing funding trails, shell companies, Cayman accounts, and Thiel's spiderweb of legal shields. The architecture was clear, a network designed not to operate in daylight, but to cast shadows over it. Law firms refused to comment. One former engineer went live on a burner feed, eyes wild, voice cracking. It was never about protecting people. It was about predicting them and controlling them. She went offline an hour later. In the silence, one name rose louder than the rest: Peter Thiel. Commentators debated his role: visionary, villain, or both. Footage of him resurfaced from past interviews, eerily prescient. "Most people are sheep," he had once said, "and freedom is wasted on them." The words hit differently now. People replayed the tape again and again. That face, calm, cold, calculated. The man who bankrolled lawsuits to destroy media outlets. The man who'd placed operatives into governments and think tanks. No fingerprints, only influence. As headlines screamed his name, he didn't appear. No apology. No rebuttal. Just silence. Louder than words. That night, the city felt different. News had slowed, but tension buzzed in alleys and boardrooms. No one knew what would come next. Investors panicked quietly. Lawyers worked late, shredding connections. Protest organizers grew louder. Government agencies started internal audits. And yet, Thiel remained invisible. But his absence wasn't silence, it was strategy. Somewhere he was watching, listening, planning. The world was trying to catch up. But the clock had already moved. And in that breath between panic and retaliation, the shadow empire was still standing, quietly intact. Before the empire, there was the boy. Peter Thiel, born in Frankfurt in 1967, arrived in America as a child of immigrants. A brainy, distant presence in suburban California. He was brilliant, withdrawn, and obsessed with control. Classmates recall a boy who didn't fit, who watched more than he played. His father was an engineer, cold and methodical. His mother was supportive but distant, nurturing intellect more than emotion. In school, Peter excelled: math, logic, debate. But he rarely smiled. He spoke about chess, about strategy, about winning. Always about winning. While other children dreamed of being astronauts or firefighters, Peter imagined how systems could be broken, then rebuilt in his image. The loneliness wasn't weakness. It was rehearsal. At Stanford, the quiet child became something sharper. Peter Thiel arrived with a scholarship and left with a mission. It was here he forged his contrarian ideology, reading Ayn Rand, Nietzsche, and Machiavelli with surgical precision. He didn't just absorb ideas, he repurposed them into weapons. While others protested, he published. He co-founded the Stanford Review, a conservative paper that courted controversy and drew enemies like moths to flame. "What if democracy isn't always good?" he once wrote, casually. He didn't fear provocation. He sought it. Classmates debated him. Professors tolerated him. But Peter, always 5 steps ahead, was building the intellectual skeleton of his empire, and the armor hardware to defend it. In the late 90s, Peter wasn't chasing fame. He was chasing leverage. With a few former classmates and tech outsiders, he launched Confinity, which merged with Elon Musk's X.com to become PayPal. To outsiders, it was a digital wallet. But to Thiel, it was something far more dangerous, a vessel for disrupting money itself. Internal battles raged, philosophy versus flash. Musk wanted growth. Thiel wanted control. Eventually, Peter won. He ousted Musk and took the reins. Under Thiel's watch, PayPal was shaped like a machine for borderless capital and information transfer, legal or not. "We weren't just trying to build a product," a former employee whispered years later. "We were building a weapon." And behind it all, Thiel's cold gaze never blinked. From PayPal's collapse came something more potent, the so-called PayPal Mafia. Thiel, always strategic, placed bets on people, not products. He backed a young Mark Zuckerberg, guided a fiery Elon Musk, seeded companies like YouTube, LinkedIn, and Palantir. But it wasn't a brotherhood, it was a network. And Peter sat at its center, the spider who spun the silk. He didn't need to run everything. He needed to influence it. He taught his disciples one rule: be contrarian, be absolute, never negotiate. The world saw unicorns rising. Peter saw levers multiplying. One by one his allies infiltrated tech, finance and politics. And they owed him, whether they admitted it or not. For Thiel, grudges weren't weakness, they were fuel. In 2007, Gawker outed him publicly. He didn't scream. He didn't sue. He vanished. Then over years, in secret, he funded a campaign to destroy them, quietly bankrolling Hulk Hogan's lawsuit, until the gossip empire crumbled. It wasn't revenge. It was strategy. The message was clear: cross Thiel, and he won't come at you loud, but he will come. "They thought I was just another rich guy," Thiel later said. They were wrong. His empire didn't just grow by building. It grew by erasing enemies. From the shadows. Without fingerprints. And in that quiet destruction, the myth of Peter Thiel sharpened into something colder than power: silence weaponized. In 2023, Peter Thiel co-founded Palantir, not as a company, but as a blueprint for total visibility. Built on PayPal's fraud detection core, Palantir promised to decode the digital fog of war: patterns in chaos, connections in noise. But behind the marketing buzzwords, data fusion, counter-terrorism, national security, lurked something colder. It wasn't about seeing everything. It was about knowing everything before anyone else. With CIA backing from In-Q-Tel, Thiel's dream took root. Palantir infiltrated police departments, federal agencies, private companies. It became the go-to oracle for modern surveillance. The pitch was safety. The practice was something else entirely. The power to track lives, not reactively, but preemptively. predictive policing, behavioral red flags, thought before action. In Thiel's world, visibility was control. And control was everything. Palantir wasn't just a tech firm, it was a new limb of government. Through contracts with the Pentagon, ICE, NSA, and police departments nationwide, Thiel embedded his software deep into the organs of state power. Military briefings, immigration raids, protester tracking. Palantir's fingerprints were everywhere, but its name remained whispered, if at all. One former officer said, "You'd think we were using some black market intelligence from a sci-fi novel." And perhaps they were. The public never voted for this. But no one stopped it either. Why? Because Palantir worked. Or at least it appeared to. The lines between private enterprise and federal force blurred. And in that fog, Peter Thiel was rewriting the rules, not just of tech, but of governance itself. Despite shaping some of the most powerful systems in the world, Peter Thiel never joined the tech elites club. He mocked their utopias, their performative progressivism. He rarely appeared at gala events, and when he did, he observed, not mingle. Silicon Valley feared him, not because he was loud, but because he never needed them. He was the architect who stayed behind the curtain. While others tweeted and posed, Thiel recruited. He hosted salons, backed oddball startups, and whispered in the ears of those who didn't fit. Founders came to him not for capital, but for permission. He told them it was okay to defy, to dominate, to believe the world was broken, and they were chosen to fix it. He was their oracle, their dark mentor. Thiel didn't just shape companies, he shaped ideologies. While the world debated online ethics, Peter funneled money into think tanks, legal campaigns, and hyper-libertarian scholars. From seasteading to anti-democracy essays, his money flowed where chaos brewed. Few knew the full scope. One group fighting for online free speech later discovered their largest donor opposed speech itself. It wasn't contradiction. It was strategy. If power was the goal, then rules were just tools. Thiel gave to those who could destabilize, fragment, and tilt the axis. The left called him a villain. The right called him a genius. But Thiel didn't believe in sides, only in winners. The rest were distractions. By the early 2010s, whispers turned to warnings. Journalists, activists, and ex-employees started asking the same question. How much power does Peter Thiel really have? But answers were slippery. He left no digital trails, gave no spontaneous interviews. Yet his ideas, anti-democracy, engineered inequality, elite rule, kept resurfacing. In universities, in startups, in governments. One tech critic called him the philosopher king of the shadow world. Another simply called him dangerous. And still, Palantir grew. His investments spread. His influence deepened. What do you do when someone is building a new world, but doesn't ask permission from the old one? You can't vote him out. You can't cancel him. And by the time you notice, it's already too late. It wasn't just Gawker. Behind closed doors, Thiel had turned litigation into a weapon. Over the years, he quietly funded dozens of lawsuits, some personal, some strategic, many anonymous. He created shell foundations to bankroll plaintiffs who couldn't afford a fight. But the goal wasn't justice. It was annihilation. He believed the media had grown arrogant, corrupt, unaccountable. You don't need to shoot a snake, he once said. Just cut off its oxygen. And that's what lawsuits did. Slow, silent suffocation. Newsrooms bled cash. Reporters self-censored. Editors passed on stories. It wasn't censorship. It was chilling. A calculated freeze. The message, challenge Thiel's world, and the cost will be legal, financial, existential. You won't even know where the bullet came from. As the world focused on tech, Thiel moved into politics. but not with speeches or campaign trails. He gave money, quietly, heavily, to fringe candidates, radical ideologues, and groups others wouldn't touch. His strategy was clear: fund the extremes, shift the center. He supported rising voices who questioned democracy, glorified authoritarianism, and promised to tear down existing systems. Democracy doesn't scale, Thiel once said at a private event. His allies nodded. They didn't want reform. They wanted rupture. Slowly, his fingerprints appeared on election outcomes, media platforms, and judicial appointments, but never center stage. Always as the shadow patron. He wasn't building alliances, he was breeding insurgents. Power wasn't enough. Peter Thiel became obsessed with conquering death. He poured millions into life extension startups, blood transfusion experiments, and cryogenics labs. He surrounded himself with scientists who believed aging was a disease, and Thiel intended to cure it. But the ideology went deeper. Rumors swirled of interest in eugenics, of secret meetings on genetic privilege and engineered intelligence. To Thiel, the future didn't belong to the masses. It belonged to the superior, the optimized. One former biologist described it bluntly: he believes nature got it wrong, he wants to fix it, and he has the money to try. It wasn't just science. It was theology. The gospel of human supremacy, rewritten by code and cash. Thiel's desire to escape wasn't metaphorical. It was literal. He backed seasteading projects, floating city-states in international waters, free from regulation, tax, or democracy. We wanted to exit the system, one former partner said. Peter wanted to build a new one from scratch. These ocean colonies promised freedom from state interference, a haven for innovation and inequality alike. Utopia for the few, collapse for the rest. Engineers drew blueprints. Naval architects ran tests. But critics called it neo-feudalism in the sea. They saw not freedom, but oligarchy unshackled. The dream eventually stalled. But the idea remained. Thiel didn't want to fix the world. He wanted to leave it behind and rule what came next. But even empires built in shadows can crack. Inside Thiel's circle, whispers began to spread. Founders distanced themselves. Former allies questioned the ethics. Some leaked documents. Others vanished quietly. One confidant confessed, "He's not wrong. He's just not human anymore." The ideas had outpaced the people. The obsession with control, domination, purity, it began to rot the core. His vision was too extreme. His loyalty, transactional. And when trust broke, fear filled the gap. Ex-partners changed phone numbers. Employees lawyered up. The machine still moved, but it stuttered. Thiel noticed. But he didn't chase them. He never did. He simply recalculated and looked for colder replacements. The subpoenas arrived quietly, but they shook the ground. Palantir executives were summoned to Capitol Hill. Senators demanded answers. What data? Whose lives? What limits? In the hearing chamber, flashbulbs burst as a senior Palantir VP testified under oath. "We only serve legal frameworks," he said. But behind his calm sweat glistened. Lawmakers read aloud leaked documents, internal memos mapping protester networks, minority surveillance lists, predictive arrest metrics. The room stiffened. "Is this security?" one senator asked, "or preemptive tyranny?" Thiel wasn't there. He never is. But his shadow filled the room. He'd built a machine that danced on the edge of legality, and now the machine had questions to answer. Then the real damage came. From within. Former employees began speaking out. Engineers, analysts, legal staff. One after another, they gave interviews, leaked emails, wrote op-eds. "I believed we were saving the world," one wrote. "Instead, we built a prison of algorithms." Another revealed secret data-sharing partnerships with foreign regimes. Anonymous sources claimed black bag data operations, accessing health records, voting databases, personal communication trails. The image of Thiel's empire, efficient, untouchable, cracked. And through the cracks fear poured out. "He didn't threaten us," one whistleblower said. "He didn't have to. You just knew what would happen if you crossed the line." While one empire crumbled, another rose. Thiel had already moved into politics. He poured millions into campaigns. Senators, governors, influencers. All young, all loyal. He didn't run for office, but he selected who could. He didn't give speeches, but his words echoed in theirs. "America has lost its edge," they said. "We need disruption." It wasn't rhetoric. It was doctrine. Candidates he backed attacked institutions, courts, academia. They promised a new order. Some won. Others ignited cultural firestorms. Thiel didn't care about polls. He cared about vectors. Ideological force. Once again he was the force behind the curtain, designing a future where his rules governed and his enemies were irrelevant. But momentum breeds resistance. Grassroots coalitions began forming. Digital rights activists, ex-engineers, whistleblowers, and journalists. A leaked batch of Palantir data revealed misused police reports, hacked social feeds, even mental health records flagged for surveillance. Lawsuits flooded in. Tech leaders distanced themselves. Political opponents weaponized his name. Thiel, for the first time, faced open revolt from both left and right. The empire wasn't collapsing, but it was under siege. One protester said, "He gave us the tools of war and called it peace." Outside Thiel-backed offices, crowds chanted not for justice, but for transparency. And Thiel? Still silent. Watching. Letting the storm test his design. The machine sputtered. "No." Investors hesitated. Boardrooms whispered. Some contracts froze. A few were cancelled. Thiel convened his closest advisors in an encrypted bunker meeting. No phones, no Wi-Fi. Eyes narrow, jaws clenched. "They're not coming for the tech," he said. "They're coming for the idea." But the question hung in the air. Had he gone too far? He had shaped governments, swayed culture, predicted behavior, and now the public finally saw behind the curtain. In those moments, Thiel recalculated. He didn't fold. He never did. But for the first time, he adjusted his map. The empire would evolve. Harden. Want new. Hide deeper. But the war was no longer quiet. The ghost had been seen. When the headlines faded and the protests quieted, Peter Thiel vanished again, but not out of weakness. He retreated to an undisclosed compound in New Zealand, far from subpoenas and social networks. No press. No leaks. Just silence. Some called it exile. Others called it strategy. On a windswept coastline, he oversaw the construction of a secure estate, solar-powered, bunker-ready, drone-patrolled. It was more than privacy. It was permanence. The world outside was boiling. Inside, Thiel built a fortress not of stone, but of certainty. He didn't need to defend his empire anymore. He needed to outlive its collapse. Where others feared the end, Peter calculated a beginning, the version of civilization he could tolerate, engineered from the ground up. Back in Silicon Valley and DC, the fallout burned slowly. Former partners lost contracts. Some faced lawsuits. A few were blacklisted. Thiel's silence became contagious. Those once eager to be photographed beside him now deleted old tweets and scrubbed his name from portfolios. A kind of digital erasure began. The institutions he'd influenced rewrote their narratives. "We never knew," they claim. But they had. Everyone had. One whistleblower said, "He didn't just disrupt, he corrupted." Yet strangely, no one could stop referencing him. Panels invoked his name. Think tanks dissected his tactics. Even in exile, Thiel remained the gravitational center, unseen but unavoidable. The empire's reach had thinned, but its imprint had sunk deep. Alone in his sanctum, Thiel began writing again, Not blogs, not memos, but dense private manifestos. Observers claimed he was working on the next blueprint, some mix of AI governance and digital exodus. Others believed he'd already uploaded much of his identity into experimental neural interfaces. But one former aide revealed something stranger. Thiel had a room lined with mirrors. Not for vanity, but reflection. He never looked into them, she said. He watched them. Surveillance turned inward. Power without performance. Maybe the question wasn't what Peter would do next, but whether Peter Thiel, the man, still existed, or had been replaced by the machine he built. In time, the politicians he'd groomed fell, some scandalized, others simply irrelevant. Their rhetoric grew tired. Their donors vanished. Their movements fractured. Without Thiel's whisper guiding them, they fumbled. It became clear they weren't leaders. They were mouthpieces. And the voice behind them had gone quiet. Voters turned. Networks collapsed. A few tried to pivot. Most disappeared. Thiel watched, not with disappointment, but calculation. In his mind, they were prototypes, models. And like all early iterations, they were meant to fail. He hadn't bet on them for their success, but for what they'd teach him. The next version would be different. Smarter. Less human. Thiel was never sentimental. Legacy didn't interest him, leverage did. As the physical empire frayed, his attention turned to what he'd always craved, the abstract frontier. AI labs, quantum prediction markets, synthetic governance. He spoke of accelerating evolution, uploading consciousness, escaping biology. The world debated ethics. He rewrote definitions. He didn't believe in the soul. He believed in signal, code, precision. History is noise, he once wrote. Only algorithms endure. If Act 1 was PayPal, and Act 2 was Palantir, then Act 3 was coming, and no one would see it until it had already begun. He wasn't gone. He was evolving. Into what? Even Thiel might not know. But he had time, and silence, and still, that calculating gaze. Somewhere in a private vault, a document exists. A final address. It's not a speech. Not a memoir, but a blueprint, part philosophical monologue, part operational guide. Thiel called it, The Principles of Escape. In it he writes, history is the repetition of weakness. Progress belongs to the ruthless. Control is not corruption, it is inevitability. There are no mentions of democracy. None of freedom. Only variables, trajectories, and control systems. Some call it prophecy. Others call it madness. But in this dark gospel, Peter Thiel has recorded everything. The wars to come, the minds to shape, the chaos to be harnessed. It isn't a farewell. It's a warning. Or perhaps an invitation. The world tries to forget, but the signs remain. Palantir's code still hums in background systems. Thiel-backed senators still cast votes. Startups still carry his early checks in their foundations. Surveillance drones patrol cities. Data brokers feed algorithms that trace our behaviors, systems born of his philosophy, whether they admit it or not. A montage unfolds. Headline servers blinking to life, encrypted apps, campus lectures quoting him, leaders invoking his language unknowingly. The empire didn't fall. It dispersed. It mutated. Like a virus, its presence is everywhere, subtle, invisible, encoded. Thiel isn't the ghost in the machine. He is the architecture. Behind the systems were people, some empowered, others erased. A startup founder who still calls him a genius. A journalist whose career was buried after a single article. A senator who rose on Thiel's funding and fell on his silence. A protester arrested by software they didn't know was tracking them. A whistleblower still living under threat. And somewhere, a young coder opens a book of his essays and feels awakened. For every critic, there's a disciple. For every victim, An advocate. Peter Thiel didn't seek love or hate. He sought impact. And he found it. Across generations. Across ideologies. Across borders. For better or worse, he made his mark, in code, in flesh, in consequence. The world wonders. Where is he now? What is he building? Rumors abound, a sentient intelligence trained on global war patterns, a crypto-governed city-state, a quiet investment in Mars colonization. No one knows for sure. But those close to him say this: he's always working, always watching. The last bet may already be in play, coded, launched, hidden in plain sight. Not a company, not a candidate, but a trigger. A of ideas designed to outlast his body. Legacy, Thiel once said, is for the weak. I prefer permanence. It's not a game anymore. It's evolution. And the final move may be one only he understands. The camera holds still. Peter Thiel sits in silence. No tech, no entourage, no screens. Just a mirror. He looks at himself. Not with pride. Not with regret. Just calculation. Reflection. This is not redemption. It's reckoning. The cost of power isn't always paid in blood. Sometimes it's paid in solitude. In legacy whispered, not praised. In ideas that outlive even their architect. He reaches forward, almost to touch the glass, but doesn't. A final smirk. A blink. Then stillness. The world may forget the man. But it won't escape the system. His fingerprints are everywhere. And if the future is shaped by those who dare to reshape it, then Peter Thiel has already won.